All right, hello everyone again. As promised, here is chapter 1 of the Adam and Eve story, The History of Cataclysms by Chan Thomas. Here's the first figure here. Go ahead and give everybody an opportunity to look at this real quick. A little diagram of the Earth according to Thomas. Just how much of what is what. Figures in miles. Let's see. We live on a big small planet, it looks like. Yep. All right, continuing on. Cover page. To dear wife, without her help and faith, through the years of sleepless nights and seemingly endless trails of study, research, translation, and travel, this book never would have come into being. To General Hal Grant and his wonderful family, to General LeMay and Admiral Taylor, to the joint staff of that time for their inspiring encouragement, without which this book might not exist. And, this section's usually not really anything anybody pays attention to, but the fact that Mr. Thomas included the names of 2 generals and 1 naval admiral is pretty significant to me, as well as a mention of the joint chiefs of staff rather. This to me would indicate that Mr. Thomas was pretty well connected. If you know people like this, then you would typically tend to also know things. And that's just me speaking as a veteran. All right, now more of what we came here for. To all those who ridiculed, scorned, and laughed, relegating me to the nut house and even firing me. For how else would I have been so driven to pursue, solve, find, and derive the truth I owe them? Today we're going to read here from the table of contents, Chapter 1, The Next Cataclysm, which goes from page 1 to page 9. And then in the next video, we'll start with the Great Floods, followed by the story, the event, the retranslation of Genesis, Cataclysms Revisited, conclusion, and the About the Author section, which was added to the specific version of the PDF. All right, here we go. It begins. Make this a little bit bigger. With a rumble so low as to be inaudible, growing, throbbing, then fuming into a thundering roar, the earthquake starts. Only it's not like any earthquake in recorded history. In California, the mountains shake like ferns in a breeze. The mighty Pacific rears back and piles up into a mountain of seawater more than 2 miles high. It then starts its race eastward. With the force of 1,000 armies, the wind attacks, ripping, shredding everything in supersonic bombardment. The unbelievable mountain of Pacific seawater follows the wind eastward, burying Los Angeles and San Francisco as if they were but grains of sand. Nothing but nothing stops the relentless, overwhelming onslaught of wind and ocean. Across the continent, the 1,000-mile-per-hour wind wreaks its hell. Its unholy vengeance everywhere, mercilessly, unceasingly. Every living thing is ripped into shreds while being blown across the countryside, and earthquakes leave no place untouched. In many places, the Earth's molten sublayer breaks through and spreads a sea of white-hot liquid fire to add to the Holocaust. Within 3 hours, the fantastic wall of seawater moves across the continent, burying the wind-ravaged land under 2 miles of seething water coast to coast. In a fraction of a day, all vestiges of civilization are gone, and the great cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas, New York, Boston, are nothing but legends. Barely a stone is left where millions walked just a few hours before. A few lucky ones who managed to find shelter from the screaming wind on the lee side of a high mountain peak, such as Mount Massive, watched the sea of molten fire breaking through the quaking valleys below. The raging waters follow at supersonic speeds, piling higher and higher, steaming over the molten earth fire, and rising almost to their feet. Only great high mountains such as this one can withstand the cataclysmic onslaught. North America is not alone in her death throes. Central America suffers the same cannonade: wind, earth, fire, and inundation. South America finds the Andes not high enough to stop the cataclysmic violence, pounded out by nature in her berserk rage. In less than a day, Ecuador, Peru, and western Brazil are shaken madly by the devastating earthquake. The Andes are piled higher and higher by the Pacific supersonic onslaught as it surges over itself against the mountains. The entire continent is burned by molten earth fire, buried under cubic miles of catastrophically violent seas, then turned into a frozen hell. Everything freezes. Man, beast, plant, and mud are all rock hard in less than 4 hours. Europe cannot escape the onslaught. The raging Atlantic piles higher and higher on itself. Following the screeching wind eastward, the Alps, Pyrenees, Urals, and Scandinavian mountains are shaken, then heaved even higher when the wall of seawater strikes. Western Africa and the sands of the Sahara vanish in nature's wrath, under savage attack by wind and ocean. The area bounded by Zaire, South Africa, and Kenya suffers only severe earthquakes and winds, little inundation. Survivors there marvel at the sun standing still in the sky for nearly half a day. Wow. Eastern Siberia and the Orient suffer a strange fate indeed, as though a giant subterranean scythe sweeps away the Earth's foundations, accompanied by the wind in its screaming symphony of supersonic death and destruction. As the Arctic basin leaves its polar home, Eastern Siberia, Manchuria, China, and Burma are subjected to the same annihilation as South America. Wind, earth, fire, and inundation, as well as freezing. Jungle animals are shredded to ribbons by the wind, piled into mountains of flesh and bone, and buried under avalanches of homogenized seawater and mud. Then comes the sudden, seemingly infinite supply of terrible, instant paralyzing temperature drop of 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Not man, beast, plant, muck, earth, nor water is left unfrozen in the entire eastern Asian continent, most of which remains below sea level. Antarctica, Greenland, with their ice caps, now rotate around the Earth in the torrid zone, and the fury of wind and inundation marches on for 6 days. During the 6th day, the oceans start to settle in their new homes, running off the high grounds. On the 7th day, the horrendous rampage is over. The Arctic Ice Age is ended, and a new Stone Age begins. The oceans, the great homogenizers, have laid down another deep layer of mud over the existing strata in the Great Plains, as exposed in the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, Monument Valley, and also the Badlands. The Bay of Bengal Basin, just east of India, is now at the North Pole. The Pacific Ocean, just west of Peru, is at the South Pole. Greenland and Antarctica, now rotating equatorially, find their ice caps dissolving madly in the tropical heat. Massive walls of water and ice surge towards the oceans, taking everything from mountains to plains in gushing, heaving paths, while creating immense seasonal moraines. In less than 25 years, the ice caps are gone, and the oceans around the world rise over 200 feet with the newfound water. The torrid zone will be shrouded in a fog for generations from the enormous amounts of moisture poured into the atmosphere by the melting ice caps. New ice caps begin to form in the new polar areas. Greenland and Antarctica emerge with verdant tropical foliage. Australia is the new unexplored continent in the North Temperate Zone, with only a few handfuls of survivors populating its vastness. New York now lies at the bottom of the Atlantic, shattered, melted by earth fire, and covered by unbelievable amounts of mud. Of San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, and Boston, not a trace is left. They will all join the legends of the 7 cities of Cibola. What's left of Egypt emerges from its Mediterranean inundation, new and higher, still the land of the ages. The commonplace of our time becomes the mysterious Baalbek of the new era. A new era. Yes, the cataclysm has done its work well. The greatest population regulator of all does once more for man what he refuses to do for himself, and the planet on which he lives, and drives the pitiful few who survive into a new Stone Age. After this cataclysm, we now join Noah, Adam and Eve, Atlantis, Mu, and Olympus, and Jesus joins Osiris, Ta'aura, Zeus, and Vishnu. And that is the end of the first chapter. I'm actually kind of surprised how quickly I read that. We're going to stop here for this particular video. I just want to give a quick little commentary real quick. We covered in the first video, which is my coverage of what is the only biography that can be found on Mr. Chan Thomas, anywhere on the internet. And believe me, I've looked, folks. It was determined that Professor Charles Hapgood's theories were probably more correct than Mr. Thomas's, though I do think that Mr. Chan Thomas here is on to something, and we'll begin to explore that later on when we discuss grand solar minimum, solar cycles, and supernova events that have occurred throughout history. And that is wherein I think something like what Mr. Thomas here is describing is more like what will happen in a case like that, especially when you consider the fact that the Antarctic ice sheets have not melted in excuse me, in most regions for over 1.5 million years. But if pole shifts weren't any more significant than 20 or 40 degrees, which is still inherently really catastrophic, and on that 2012 the movie level, I think what we got to worry about more, folks, is probably star metal impactors, high density plasma discharge events that is slated to occur sometime in the next 20 years. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there with that. The next video to follow is going to be a fun one. I'm going to be doing a march down Central Avenue here in downtown St. Petersburg, where I happen to be living right now. And we're going to do what I call the Central Avenue mural run. And this is going to be a big series. This is going to have like 6 to 10 parts to it, because there's just so much of this really, really cool, spectacular art to cover here in the downtown city part of St. Petersburg, which I got to confess I'm starting to come to fall in love with. Anywho, if you enjoy this content and you want to hear more, and this message finds you well, please do that dirty deed and smack that subscribe button. And if you like this video, well, then you know what button to hit for that also. I am out for now. Peace, folks.